Let's be frank. Look at the map. Turn off the television. Forget the fairy tales the mainstream media tries to spoon feed you every morning. The truth, the ugly, brutal truth that the people in Washington are terrified to whisper, is that the Ukrainian state as a functioning modern industrial entity is gone. It doesn't exist. What we have witnessed in the last few days is not blackmail or terrorism, as the neocons are screaming. No, it is physics. It is industrial scale attrition. The Russians have decided to turn out the lights permanently. They aren't striking nuclear reactors because Putin is a cautious man. He's not insane. He doesn't want radiation drifting across the Russian border. Instead, what are they doing? They are severing the 750 kV and 330 kV substations. This is the aorta of the grid. When you cut these high voltage transmission lines, the nuclear plants are forced into an emergency scram. It is called islanding. And when that happens, the economy dies, logistics die, and the capability to sustain modern warfare dies with them. The people in the Pentagon know this. They know that no Patriot or SAM-PT system on Earth can protect a national grid against a saturation strike of over 400 missiles and drones arriving simultaneously. It is simple math. You fire a $4 million interceptor at a lawnmower engine drone worth a few $1,000s. That is a recipe for national bankruptcy. And the Russians know it. They are playing cat and mouse with Western air defense. They flood the zone with decoys, Gerberus, Italmus. Why? To drain the magazines. And once the launchers are empty, the KH-101s and calibers come in for the kill. The result? Half of Ukraine is freezing. The Burstin plant is destroyed in the middle of winter. This is not an accident. This is strategic strangulation. General Sherman did the exact same thing when he marched to the sea in the American Civil War. You destroy the enemy's infrastructure so they physically cannot fight, and Russia is doing it with brutal efficiency. Now let's talk about this so-called June deadline coming out of Kiev. It is laughable, absolute delusion. Washington is pressuring Zelensky to wrap this war up by early summer. Why? Because they care about Ukrainian lives? No, never. They care about the U.S. midterm election cycle. The uniparty in Washington is in a panic. They have thrown hundreds of billions of dollars into this black hole and have nothing to show for it but inflation and the collapse of American prestige. But let me tell you this, war does not follow the American election calendar. The Russians hold the initiative. They have the manpower. They have the ammunition. And most importantly, they have time. Putin is in no rush. Why should he be? He is winning on the ground in Donbas without even fully mobilizing his economy. Setting a deadline when you are losing on the battlefield is like ordering the tide to stop rising. It is asinine. And then we hear about this $12 Trillion Dmitriev Package. Look closely at that number, 12 trillion. That is the bribe the globalists and donors are dangling. They want to buy a way out. They want to go back to business. They want cheap Russian gas, minerals, and markets. All the flowery rhetoric about sovereignty and democracy was thrown out the window the moment those economic figures hit the table in Abu Dhabi. This is the nature of this conflict from the start: money. It is a massive transfer of wealth from the American middle class to the defense contractors, and now it's a desperate attempt to save the Western financial system using Russian resources. But will Russia take it? I doubt it. Why would they accept a free economic zone in Donbas, a meaningless state within a state, when they have already constitutionally annexed those territories? Russians don't fight for money. They fight for existential security. And they will not sell that security for any package Wall Street puts together. Look at the reality on the ground in Pokrovsk. It is a meat grinder. Russia is using relentless infantry assaults backed by overwhelming artillery and air power. They dropped 132 glide bombs across the front in a single day. Do you understand the physics of that? It turns concrete into dust. Nothing survives that. And the Western reports on Russian casualties? Be careful. They say Russia is losing men but preserving tanks. Why? Because they are using disposable infantry to probe and grind down Ukraine's last best units. Meanwhile, Ukraine is throwing its best men into a cauldron to hold on to lines on a map. This attrition rate is unsustainable. Ukraine is running out of men. We are watching the demographic destruction of a nation, and the fools in Washington are clapping and sending more ammo. It is criminal. The assassination attempt on General Alexeyev in Moscow, or the drone strikes on the fuel plant in Tver, these sound impressive in the headlines, but strategically, They change nothing. It is like being stung by a bee while driving a tank. It is annoying, sure. It shows a security gap, yes, but it does not stop the tank. Ukraine is turning to terrorism and sabotage because they cannot win a conventional war. They cannot push the Russians back on the battlefield, so they try to create chaos in the rear. But history proves, look at World War II, that strategic bombing or assassinations never break the will of a great land power. On the contrary, it only hardens their resolve. They will see this as an existential war against the collective West, and they will mobilize everything to crush the threat. We are poking the bear instead of finding a way out of the cage. Finally, look at the big picture. Winter is here, and it is freezing. The heating systems in Western Ukraine are collapsing. What happens next? Another migration wave pours into Europe. Poland and Germany cannot take anymore. The social fabric of Europe is fracturing under the weight of this war. NATO, that dead man walking, is trying to look strong, but inside it is hollow. They have no 155mm shells. They have no Leopard tanks left to give. And most importantly, they have no will to fight and die for the Donbas. The game is up. It has been over militarily for a long time. What remains is just a painful prolongation to serve the political interests of a corrupt elite. We need to stop. The U.S. needs to withdraw, focus on our own wide-open southern border, and let the Russians and Ukrainians settle this based on geographic and historical reality. If we don't, we won't just see the collapse of Ukraine, we will see the collapse of the entire Western order.